I want to start here because as we have been talking about those major delays and cancellations that we saw last year, I know you have been having ongoing conversations with the CEOs and leaders of the major airlines. Can you share some insight about those conversations?
Well, ever since we had the issues we saw a year ago with all of those cancellations and delays, I've frequently let airline leadership know what is expected of them, that they need to step up, and that we're ready to collaborate and do anything we can as an agency or in the FAA that would help. There's been a lot of response to that. I'll tell you, this year so far looking a lot better than last year. Each month so far this year, cancellations are below 2%. So I'm encouraged by that, but there's a long way to go. There's going to be a lot of pressure on the system this summer, still a lot of frustrations for passengers, and that's why our overall goal through this term is to see the biggest expansion in passenger rights that we've had since deregulation happened in the first place decades ago.
And I want to get to some of those passenger rights and this week's announcement that you and the president made about some potential rule changes. I want to get to that in just a moment. But first, in the here and now, passengers want to know what if their flight is significantly delayed or canceled, and if it's in the airline's control. Those passengers want to know that they're going to be covered. So talk with me about what tangible actions your agency can take to ensure passengers are taken care of, while also keeping in mind the airlines say, look, a lot of this stuff that's being talked about are things that they already do in terms of compensation with some of the hotel vouchers, meal vouchers, reimbursement, things like that. So what exactly is your agency doing to ensure that there's follow through, and how does that compare to what airlines say they're already doing?
Well, as a passenger, you want to go to our website, flightrights.gov, to get more information airline by airline on what to expect. A year ago, before we put up that information, not one of the top 10 airlines made any kind of guarantees that they would cover things like meals or ground transportation or rebooking. Now, almost all of them do, and we've gotten agreements that are enforceable, which means that if they did not live up to those commitments, there would be a fine. So we've seen a lot of improvements. I guess any airline saying that they're doing these things, that's great. We just want them to put it in writing so that we can follow up if there's a problem. And we also want to set a floor. That's what these rules are about, saying, look, no matter what airline you're on, there are certain basic things that need to happen to take care of passengers, especially in situations where the airline is responsible for the delay. We all understand that there's going to be weather, that nobody controls the weather, and that you're never going to see zero delays or cancellations. But when something happens because the airline didn't do its job right, then the airline needs to take care of you. That's what these rules and enforcement are all about.
Now, to that point, the delays and cancellations, to be fair, they are not 100% on the airlines. You mentioned weather, but the airlines, yes, they need pilots to get planes to where they need to be, and airlines are trying to hire pilots, but the airlines also say that part of the blame is on the FAA in that there's not enough air traffic controllers, for example. Is that a fair assessment from your perspective, and what is the FAA doing to address what the airlines say is its share of the challenge?
Well, there's no question that FAA has a share of the challenge. Now, I want to be clear. Air traffic control issues are not the reason for the majority of these delays and cancellations, but staffing can be an issue, and that can affect flights. It's one of the reasons why we're acting right now to hire more air traffic controllers. We've got about 1,500 in this year's hiring cohort. The president's budget for next year requests another 1,800 to come on board. And I do need to mention, if you're seeing these national headlines about the budget negotiations, this is one of the things that is at stake. If the House Republican budget, as passed, that bill they passed a couple weeks ago, if that actually became law, that would actually stop us completely from being able to hire more air traffic controllers. It would freeze our training operations, and there's no way we could absorb that without a lot of furloughs, without towers shutting down, and you would see that in the system in terms of delays. So this is exactly why we're working to get more resources for both the tech side to modernize the equipment and the human side to make sure we're hiring all of the staff we need to support this extraordinary and, by the way, very welcome interest and demand for so many passengers who want to return to the skies.
You talk about flyer rights. You and the president spoke this week about wanting to propose some new rules. It even sounds like perhaps some compensation beyond just refunds, perhaps some cash or other benefits there. What exactly is your agency and the Biden administration proposing in terms of a step forward in passenger rights?
Yeah, we're talking about real compensation here, whether it's points or vouchers or cash. Because if an airline leaves you in the lurch and they could have prevented it, then I think your time matters and you should be compensated for that. We've seen this happen in other countries. Europe has a framework for this where you get a set level of cash compensation if an airline doesn't get you where you need to go and there's a major delay. And passengers here have been calling for that for some time. So as the president announced Monday, we're moving forward with that process, and we'll be wanting public input on the details of it as we work toward finalizing that rule in the future.
And is there a realistic path for this rule and these policies to be in place, or is it like a lot of things we even see in Congress where things are proposed but doesn't quite make it across the finish line?
So this is a rule that would be within existing authority. It doesn't take an act of Congress. Congress might decide to help. They're thinking about aviation legislation this year. But we believe this is completely within our existing authorities as a department, which is why we feel it's so important to move forward. We're already preparing other rules that have been in the works, again, compatible with existing law, so we don't have to go to Congress, on things like more transparency around fees, knowing exactly what your ticket is going to cost before you get to that last step, and making sure the fees are refundable if you don't get the service. You know, in the same way that if your flight is canceled, we enforce your right to a cash refund. If you pay for bags or you pay for Wi-Fi and you don't actually get it, we want to make sure you get your money back for that as well.
Lastly, you mentioned this week that our bustling Space Coast is actually having a noticeable impact on commercial flights. We're having such frequent launches, which creates temporary airspace closures, and that's causing some delays on commercial flights. Share with us what conversations and actions that your leadership is taking and the FAA and space agencies. What exactly are all these groups doing together to kind of limit the impacts on the public?
Well, this commercial space activity is exciting, especially for the Space Coast region in Florida. It's creating a lot of jobs, but it creates some challenges too. It used to be that a commercial space launch was a pretty rare event, and so when it did happen, you could close down the airspace for a while and not worry about it that often because it didn't happen that often. Now we are seeing more and more launches, and so we have to do more work to deconflict those launch windows where you have to shut down the airspace for safety. Deconflict that with some of the busiest periods and the busiest routes. For example, if you're in the busiest time of spring break at a time of day when you've got a lot of flights coming and going, maybe not the best time for a launch window, but the space companies have their own reasons for needing to launch at a certain time. So instead of just leaving this to chance, we are working actively with the airline sector and with the space sector as these launches become more frequent to make sure they can proceed, but that they proceed in a way that has minimal effect on passenger travel. Getting that right, I think, is an important part of how we can support fewer delays, fewer cancellations, and a better experience for passengers.
And we're certainly getting used to those launches. U.S. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, always a pleasure. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Same here. Thank you. Good being with you.